Well, welcome to this issue of Discovering Truth at the Movies. Hi, my name is David Lance. In this episode of the Chronicles of Belteshazzar, during the Feast of Akitu, Timnah finds Daniel and convinces him to leave Babylon by offering to go into the mountains to pray for King Nebuchadnezzar. This ensures that Daniel will not be thrown into the fiery furnace. We'll look at using historical Christian fiction and an issue found in the movie The Silver Chalice for our question for reflection. I want to ask you to consider joining me as I read each chapter and provide commentary on my upcoming book, The Chronicles of Belteshazzar. What I've been doing is I've been reading a chapter at a time, and I've been posting them on my podcast at Discovering Truth at the Movies, as well as in a YouTube playlist. And so I'm hoping to get the book published by the end of September, and today is September the 20th, so I'm itching to get it done, quite frankly. But you can find out more about it by emailing me at dlantz@wisejargon, that's wisejargon.com, to learn more about the book and how to partner with me to distribute it. And so without further ado, let's look at chapter 16, the Feast of Akitu in the Chronicles of Belteshazzar. As Grandpa was preparing to resume the story, Nai came into the room. Gabriel is asleep, so I thought I would come and join you men for the story. Great to have you, Nai. You can make sure I tell the story right. Now, where was I? Oh, here we are. Grandpa opened the Chronicles of Belteshazzar to where he had left off and started to read. In the first year of the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar, the second wave of exiles was taken into Babylon. In a scheme intended to remove the Lord's anointed from the court of Nebuchadnezzar, Haman, the chief priest, ordered that even the exiles must bow down to the gods of the Babylonians. Of all the Hebrews exiled in Babylon, only 3 refused to obey. Through the faithfulness of a few, the gods of Babylon were shamed and the arrogance of Haman shaken. From the Chronicles of Belteshazzar. She had to find Daniel. The consequences of her not finding him would mean Haman would indeed triumph. Already, Nebuchadnezzar had entered the city gates with his second wave of exiles. Timnah, queen of the Philistines, smiled to herself, seeing full well the irony in her attempting to save the life of this Hebrew. In speaking with several who knew his habits, Timnah had chosen the one spot where Daniel might go to be able to pray and watch the entire city at the same time. Fortunately, she was in good enough physical shape to make the journey without too much loss of time. As she reached the 6th stage of the ziggurat of Etemenaki, she hoped Dagon would find favor in her. If Daniel were not to be found in his prayer chamber, she did not know where she would look next. She came to the door of the shrine to Daniel's God. Pausing to look at the gold relief design, Timnah studied the picture contained therein, a ram with its horns locked in the branches of a thorn bush. She made a mental note to ask Daniel what it meant when the time was right. As quickly as the urge to wonder about the design had come, it left. Timnah turned to the job at hand and, pulling the handle, opened the door. To her relief, she found Daniel on his knees, praying. Daniel, she said softly, not wanting to interrupt him. While the two had met on social occasions, they had rarely spoken to one another. Though the circumstances and their lack of familiarity made what Timnah had to do doubly difficult, she could not retreat now from the urgency to act. You are in great danger. Please, you must come with me and do as I say. Daniel turned and looked at the woman, recognizing her face, though searching his memories momentarily to recall her name. You are Timnah, yes? What in the world? Yes, I am Timnah, she said, cutting him off. I have come to get you. You must leave with me now. Daniel shook his head. No, that's not possible. I'm sure whatever it is, it can wait, he replied. We do not have time to debate. Your life is in danger. You can remain here and die, or you can come with me and live. Which will it be? Timnah stood in the doorway, hands balled into fists buried into her hips. Daniel, realizing that the woman meant business, rose and rolled up his prayer mat, sticking it in a corner of the shrine. Pushing the door shut behind them and locking it, Daniel began to follow her down the levels of the ziggurat. As they spiraled down the levels of the structure, Daniel finally broke the silence. It must be something of grave importance to cause the queen of Ashkelon to come and rescue me from an as yet unexplained threat. Before I go any further with you, you will have to tell me what danger it is I face." Timnah, walking slightly ahead of him, stopped and turned to face Daniel. "In 2 days, the New Year festival celebration begins. Always before, all the exile groups were required to remain in their quarters while the Chaldeans celebrated the rebirth of Marduk. However, Haman intends to request of Nebuchadnezzar that all the exiles be present at the time of the poem of creation ceremony. When all the Chaldeans bow down and worship their king as the risen Marduk, Haman will require all the exiled peoples to bow down and worship too." "But I could never do that," Daniel said, shocked that after 3 years in Babylon, he and his fellow Hebrews might be required to partake of this annual ritual. "And that is exactly what Haman expects," Timnah said tersely. "Your failure to bow down and worship Nebuchadnezzar will force the king to order your execution. It is why you must go to Nebuchadnezzar now, before Haman has a chance to make his wishes known to the king, to request leave to go into the mountains. Tell him you want to go away and pray for him and for Babylon. Only if you are not here during the New Year's celebration will you be safe." Timnah grabbed his hand and began to walk at a near jog, dragging Daniel along. Recovering from being pulled off balance, he quickly fell into step beside her, asking, "But what of the other Hebrews? What of my friends? What shall become of them?" Timnah turned and looked into Daniel's eyes, an evil grin forming on the corners of her mouth. "You will just have to trust your God to protect them, won't you?" Even while she was helping this one Hebrew, she took sadistic pleasure in lashing him with her cutting words. Daniel lowered his gaze to the ground, concentrating on the task at hand. As the two walked on in silence, Daniel's thoughts turned to the arrival of this new wave of Hebrew exiles. From atop Etemenaki, the train of Nebuchadnezzar's army and accompanying exiles could be seen to stretch into the distance. Concern for his own safety totally forgotten, Daniel looked forward to hearing the news from home. Daniel's yearning to see if any of his friends were among the arriving Hebrews grew with each passing step. But it would be at least a day, maybe two, before he could be able to speak with any newly arriving friends. Already, Nebuchadnezzar had entered the city at the head of the procession and was just entering the square of the palace when Timnah and Daniel arrived to greet him. Haman stood at the top of the stairs leading to the palace, awaiting Nebuchadnezzar. Timnah looked at him and then, grabbing Daniel by the arm, said, "You must act quickly. Go now and speak to Nebuchadnezzar before Haman has a chance to make his announcement." Despite the push Timnah gave to propel him forward, Daniel walked up to Nebuchadnezzar's chariot in a casual and relaxed manner. Raising his hands in salute, Daniel said, "Hail, great Nebuchadnezzar, ruler of the earth, welcome home." Nebuchadnezzar looked down at Daniel, the significance of what he had just done not being lost on anyone. It was the custom of the chief priest to be the first to formally greet the king when returning from a conquering expedition. Thank you, Belteshazzar. It is good to be home in time for the New Year's festivities. Do you have something you wish to say?" Without hesitation, Daniel lifted up his arms and spoke. "Only that your humble servant asks permission to go into the mountains for 10 days of fasting and prayer. There I will ask the God of my people to bless Nebuchadnezzar and to cause my people to honor and serve you." Timnah glanced quickly in Haman's direction, saw him ball his fists at his side. Undecided as to what to say or do before Nebuchadnezzar responded, he lost his chance to intervene. "By the gods, well spoken," Nebuchadnezzar replied. Looking in Haman's direction, he continued, "Yes, go and offer prayers for me and my kingdom. Will this not be a fitting tribute to Marduk, Haman?" Haman's face relaxed visibly when Nebuchadnezzar spoke to him. Timnah never ceased to be amazed at how this man could change his expression and demeanor in the twinkling of an eye to fit the needs of the situation. Ever since her pledge to Naaman several months ago to watch Haman, she had asked herself repeatedly why she had failed to see the man for the chameleon he was. Truly, fools only see that which they wish to see, and she had been a fool. "Great king, mighty conqueror, Marduk will be honored, and as Daniel worships and prays in the mountains alone, let his people also bow down and worship Marduk as chief of the gods. Thus, let it be that that on the 6th day of Akitu, the New Year's festival, when you go to the New Year's temple, all the people of Babylon, not just the Chaldeans, will bow down and worship Marduk. Let those who refuse to bow the knee to Marduk be thrown into a fiery furnace, their burned flesh offered up as a fragrant aroma to our God. Double glory to me and the gods, shouted Nebuchadnezzar. Clearly impressed with the idea, Nebuchadnezzar led his train to the palace to bathe and refresh himself from his long journey. As Timnah watched, Haman escorted the king. Daniel returned to her and his face downcast. Glaring at him, she said, had you remained in the city during the festival of Akitu, you too would have been made to bow the knee to Marduk. This you would never have done, and you would have died. Where is your gratitude? I have saved your life. Daniel looked at her, a deep sadness in his eyes. Nearly all my people will bow the knee to save their lives. Haman will have broken their resolve to worship Jehovah God alone. This is a terrible day. You conceited fool, do you not think my people also cherish their religion just as you do? But we are realistic. Our God will understand it was done under duress. You take yourself too seriously, Daniel. He smiled at her with the kind of sad, knowing smile a parent shows their little one when they have suffered harm. And then he said something that cut her to the quick. You say that because you do not truly believe your God can save you. Our God can. Those who do not bow the knee and are cast into the fire will live. This is a time of testing for our people. We have always worshiped our God in a temple, but he wishes to build his temple in our hearts, my heart and yours, Timnah. One day, Messiah will come, and in that day, our God will write a new covenant on our hearts. His law will be within us, and he shall live in us. That covenant will be free for the asking for your people, for my people, for all people. Then why did you take my advice and go to Nebuchadnezzar so that you will be gone when the rest of your people will be forced to bow down? She shot back. Daniel didn't attempt to hide the shame in his face. Finally, he answered her, because it was not until Haman spoke that I fully understand the test my God had designed. Let me explain by way of a story. Abraham was the founder of my people. Once, God demanded of him something which was unthinkable, yet Abraham obeyed without question. God commanded Abraham to take his son Isaac into the wilderness to sacrifice his son. Abraham obeyed, even though he was afraid. But because he was faithful, God provided a ram to sacrifice in his son's place. The ram pictured on the door to the room I found you in? Timnah asked, remembering the relief she had wondered about earlier. Yes, the very same. Too late. He revealed to me what must happen, and so I was not faithful as was the patriarch Abraham. Daniel lifted his hand to quiet the woman as she attempted to interrupt. I thank you for your kindness, Timnah. You did what you did in order to save me, and that is what matters. I must go now to speak with some of my people and then prepare to fulfill my vow. Daniel took his leave as Timnah stood staring at his backside. With a mixture of emotions running through her, she didn't know what to think. In any case, either this Daniel was a bumbling, self-deluded, naive fool or a mighty wizard. Of one thing she was certain. Never in her life had she met someone like him who was, well, genuinely kind and good. The Feast of Akitu was in its 5th day. Celebrated in the month of the Hebrews called Nisan during the spring equinox. It marked Babylon's New Year celebration, exalting herself, her riches, her science, her king, and her gods. For the last 5 days, the city had been engulfed in one unending carnival, interrupted with the religious ceremonies conducted by the priests. All thought of the people's daily lives had been put aside as the priests focused their attention between drunken parties on what the new year would hold if the city was blessed by Marduk. At precisely sunrise of the 6th day, Haman walked out onto the 2nd level of Esgaliah. Raising his arms, he began the poem of creation, crying out to Marduk, Marduk, unequaled in thy wrath, Marduk, king, kind king, lord of the lands, who makes the great gods favorable. Lord of kings, light of mankind, who dost allot portions. Thou dost control oracles. Within thine eyes, thou dost give the law. Lord of the lands of the city of Babylon, have mercy on the children of Babylon. A ripple of cries went forth from the citizens of Babylon at the utterance of this portion of the poem. Then, with one voice, they cried out, "Call Marduk back to life. It will not be long now." Meshach said to his two friends, "Look, here comes the barge carrying the statue of the god Anu, father of the Babylonian gods." Along with Shadrach and Abednego, Meshach watched as the great idol was brought to shore and offloaded where Nebuchadnezzar sat at his gold table awaiting its arrival. The idol had been transported downstream from its shrine. This was the signal for every temple in Babylon to open. Out of each shrine, all the gods of the city, both great and small, were brought out to join Nebuchadnezzar and Anu as they traveled down the processional way to Esgaliah. The mass of priests, idols, officials, scribes, and soldiers choked the sacred way as they transported the idols. Behind them, the masses of the people followed, all intoxicated with mystic faith. Behind them, soldiers herded members of the various exile communities forward. Because they had been made overseers under the authority of Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, led the procession of the Hebrews toward the ziggurat of Entemenaki, and behind it, Esgaliah, the temple of Marduk. While Nebuchadnezzar at the head of the procession, he stopped at the base of Entemenaki. There, priests brought a white bull to him. Dazed from the drugs so that it would pose no danger to the king, it stood by the altar awaiting its end. Taking a long gold-hilted knife, Nebuchadnezzar cut its throat. In a stupor, the bull stood for a few moments as the life's blood spurted from its jugular before collapsing. "O divine bull, thou art the shining light which illuminates the darkness," Nebuchadnezzar intoned. The priest took the bull and burned it. And as the flames leaped up to consume the bull's carcass, white smoke rose into the air. In unison, the people behind Nebuchadnezzar chanted as the king cried out, "Come out, Bel Marduk, the king awaits you." "This is the moment we have awaited," Abednego said. "When the time comes, we must do as Daniel told us and not bow down." The other two nodded their assent and watched. In response to Nebuchadnezzar, Haman recited the last part of the creation poem, taking now the voice of Marduk. "If I, your avenger, must make you live, exalt and proclaim my destiny, let the word of my mouth, even as yours, establish destinies." This was the signal to the musicians to strike their cymbals and chimes. Along the east wall of the ziggurat, Entemenaki, thousands of servants in unison lifted placards into place. When seen from afar, they displayed the symbol of Babylon, a lion with eagle's wings. The face of the lion was that of Nebuchadnezzar, their king. The people bowed down to worship their god king, who was now the god Marduk incarnate on earth, as Haman called out. "I will proclaim his might, sing his strength, celebrate his valor. Marduk, the compassionate, the merciful, to whom it is profitable to turn. He it is who hearkens to my prayer, who grants the favors which appease the hearer." Amidst the noise and shouting, Nebuchadnezzar turned with his new queen, the statue of Marduk, behind them to lead the march back across the processional way. Along both sides of the road, as the music played and the priests chanted, all the people bowed down to worship the image of Nebuchadnezzar upon the wall of Entemenaki, all except the three Hebrews. As Nebuchadnezzar came upon them, he stopped and pointed at them. "You are servants of the court of Babylon," he said. "I command you to bow down and have all the rest, or die." Shadrach, the eldest of the three, stepped forward to speak for all of them. "O great King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, what you ask is impossible for us to perform. Do with us as you will. Our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace you have prepared. But even if he chooses not to do so, O king, know that we can never bow down and serve any image of any god." And when he had finished, Shadrach stepped back to stand with the others. They stood in silence, knowing that their actions invited Nebuchadnezzar to order their deaths. Finally, Nebuchadnezzar could stand it no longer. You will be thrown into the furnace which Haman has prepared, he said, his voice trembling with anger. Tonight, at the rising of the full moon, your charred corpses will illuminate the feasting that all Babylon shall partake in. As a dozen guards knocked the three to the ground to bind and carry them off, Nebuchadnezzar led the procession of the gods forward. Well, let me share a personal reflection, but first I want to take a drink of water. There we go. When I was a freshman at Butler University, I took my one and only Bible class. It was a survey of the Old Testament. I really enjoyed it. Along with the textbook, the instructor, for the life of me, I just can't remember his name anymore, had us read a novel by James Michener called The Source. The novel is set in Israel at an archaeological dig. As the characters peel back the layers of time, and the reader is taken to flashbacks of the life of people who would have lived throughout the various levels of the dig, as it would have been like from the time of Abraham up until the time of the Apostle Paul. I only read the first half of the book, the part that dealt with the Old Testament. In the pages of that book, I learned about how the pagan cultures that lived near Israel participated in infant sacrifice and temple prostitution. One of the female characters in these flashbacks was named Timnah. I had completely forgotten that at the time I was writing my novel, The Brotherhood of the Scroll. Timnah was not a real person. Instead, it was the name of a town from where Samson's first Philistine wife came. You can read about that in Judges 14, verse 1. I concluded that James Michener had done the same thing I did. He needed a name for his Philistine female character and decided to use the name of that same town. Between reading the novel and reading the textbook when I was a freshman at Butler, the Bible came alive for me in a way it had never done before. Ever since, I've been convinced of two things. First, while they mean well, church leaders who shelter young people from the evil things recorded in the Bible do them a great disservice. I was fascinated by what I discovered in the pages of The Source. I wanted to read my Bible and to see what else was going on that I had never known about. We should feed the curiosity of young people, not kill their curiosity. Second, historical Christian novels that tell an interesting story can become a great tool to help children and young people discover God's Word. I remember being in sixth grade and my teacher, Ms. Pletcher, read us The Bronze Bow, a book that won the Newbery Award for Best in Children's Literature in 1962. The novel is set in Jerusalem during the time of Christ. A group of teenagers want to fight the Romans, and their secret symbol is a bow, the bronze bow from Psalms 18:39, which says, "He trains my hands for war so that my arms may bend, a bow of bronze." In 2005, someone wrote a study guide to accompany that book. Today, many homeschool co-ops use that novel and accompanying study guide to teach young people that love, not hate, bends the bow of bronze. In this chapter that I just read, the Feast of Akitu was an actual annual event that the Babylonians celebrated. They transported the idols of their gods down the processional way. If you have a group of fifth or sixth grade students, you might consider having them work on a project where they create a mock Babylon and then recreate the confrontation of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being taken prisoner. In the next chapter, they'll get thrown into the fiery furnace. And now I want to mention something about another novel written in 1952. It was called The Silver Chalice. It was a historical novel by Thomas Costain. It's a fictional story of the making of a silver chalice designed to hold the Holy Grail and includes first century biblical and historical figures like Luke, Joseph of Arimathea, Simon Margus and his companion Helena, and the Apostle Peter. The story was inspired by the archaeological discovery of a first century silver chalice in Antioch. It is in effect a prequel to the Arthurian legend where the search for the Holy Grail plays a conspicuous part. 2 years after its publication, Warner Brothers released a feature adaptation movie of the book. The film starred Paul Newman in his first studio role as Basil, the craftsman of the silver chalice. In the movie, Jack Palance plays Simon Magus, a magician who wants the powers of Christ. He wants to destroy Christ by destroying the chalice. And so he says, all the symbols and relics of his supremacy must be crushed out of existence. I am told one such exists, the wine cup of Jesus. Bring it to me, and together we will crush it. Well, that leads me to this following question for reflection. In a time when the world wants to crush Christ, how can we use historical Christian fiction to help our children desire to read the Bible? Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Discovering Truth at the Movies. If you go to my website at wisejargon.com/@the-movies, you'll be able to sign up for my newsletter, Conversations with the Culture. And also you'll be able to find ways to gain access to past anthologies. And so for now, I want to thank you for listening and say simply, God bless.